One day in the fall, I was up in the Goat River country. That's in the Rocky Mountain foothills. I was looking for timber. I would mark out the good-looking trees for a lumber crew that was coming through in the spring. Through the trees I heard this buzzing sound. As I kept walking, it kept growing louder and growing louder until it was close to a roar. It sounded like the lumber crew was already there, sawing the round logs into flat planks. That's a real noisy job. Like a power saw cutting through a 2x4, only 10 times louder. Well, there was an old timber crew. I followed that noise to a cave. The sound was the snore of a hibernating grizzly bear. A real sound sleeper was snoring his fool head off. Normally I wouldn't mess with a bear. The tracks told me this was old Crossclaw. I never had the pleasure of meeting him, but I'd sure seen those tracks around my cabin. Old Crossclaws had been there a couple of times to steal my winter supplies. He'd taken a whole load of fish, all my bacon, ripped open my flour, wrecked my alarm clock. Well, I just snuck into that cave real quiet like. I caught that thick bear snore and popped it in my pack. Then I made off out of there, just as quick as I could. That poor grizzly never knew what happened. Of course, he couldn't sleep without his snore. He'd wake up in a while not quite knowing what was wrong. He'd be up all winter looking for that snore. If he didn't sleep this winter, he'd be tired and cranky all spring. Well, he wouldn't have much of a summer either. It'd serve him right. Well, picked up some trouble of my own. That snore was so noisy, started to drive me crazy. Even when I wrapped it up in all the clothes I had, it was still as loud as a chainsaw with squeaky gears. By the time I got back to my cabin, I was just plain sick of it. I had to get rid of the thing. A nice clearing stood in front of my cabin. I took that snore out to the edge of it, dug a hole in the roots of a bushy little pine tree, and I planted that snore. What a change came over that tree. It became a sleep tree. Every time I went over, there'd be animals snoozing in it. At the bottom, I'd find a couple rabbits. In the middle, there'd be a raccoon or a porcupine. At the top would be half a dozen songbirds, all snoring their little heads off. And there were big animals, too, fox, mule deer, mountain lion, and black bear. I had to carry them down the path to get rid of them, and hope they didn't wake up along the way. And it wasn't only the animals, either. Once I'd pulled a thunderstorm from where it got tangled in the top branches. During March, there was a small blizzard snoozing near the bottom of the tree for most of the month. Well, I guess the power of that sleep tree grew just a little too strong. It must have started to put the whole mountain to sleep. The side of the hill it stood on caved in one day, and a poor little tree came right down with it. Well, I'd gotten attached to that tree, in spite of all the trouble it caused. I decided to cut off the limbs and the bark, saw it up into lumber. If only I had known every time I went to touch the thing I would be sleeping in no time. It took me halfway to July just to cut a half dozen 2x4s and a couple of rough planks. But in the end it was worth it, because I used that lumber to build the most comfortable bed in this here Goat River country.